to be able to articulate your life story into a single sheet of paper is both difficult, but also really, really important to be able to consolidate your message, your story, your value into a single sheet of paper. However, there's absolutely nothing there about who you are. Let's remove the conversations around, even so many people lie on resumes, people fabricate their titles, all that different stuff. But let's assume all resumes are true. There's still nothing about you as a person. And that's why video is such an important conversation, because you actually get to know somebody. That's why we always encourage organizations to say, if you really, really care to hire for people, for culture, for fit, you're not getting those things from a resume or a cover letter. You want to know more about who that person is before you actually hire them. And that's what video can do.
As a job seeker, you face many factors as you navigate the selection process. Unless you've worked in talent acquisition, much of what goes on after you submit your resume is a mystery. This series is designed to give you insight into the factors that influence whether or not you get the job. Today's topic is something that's become more prevalent since COVID, and that's video interview. Our guest today, Matt Baxter, was ahead of the curve, creating a video interviewing platform, Wedge, back in 2015. I first met Matt in early 2018, and our paths have continued to cross ever since. So let's start with giving the audience a reason to stick around, Matt. If they're interested in the impact video interviewing has on the selection process, what makes you qualified to be an expert in the field?
Well, I'm going to try my best to be a qualified expert, but I think the conversation around video, post-COVID, everybody's used to video. Pre-COVID, not a lot of people were comfortable with it. That was one of the biggest kickbacks from companies saying, oh, our candidate's actually going to go through and record videos or feel comfortable on camera. Fair question, fair point. Not everybody loves showing up right on video, that whole thing. COVID happens, everybody goes to Zoom. So now all of a sudden video is a staple part of our day-to-day communication outside of hiring. So why video interviewing specifically, and how we're a part of that conversation, why video interviewing specifically, is because we've now realized we no longer have to fly candidates across the planet to have this type of conversation for an hour to do a legitimate interview. We've also learned that not all work has to be in person, so we can do everything through video. Video has become a staple, not only a part of every day-to-day life, but specifically in hiring, because it makes everything so much more efficient and effective. Yes, there's so much value in sitting in front of somebody and meeting them. Absolutely. Not going to deny that. However, video is pivotal in this conversation because it makes the whole process efficient, effective. And in our conversation was specifically related to asynchronous video. You're removing a lot of the headaches that come from resumes and cover letters as identifying factors of what people have accomplished rather than who they are. And we've learned in the COVID world, we want to hire for culture. We want to hire for fit. We want to hire for things like empathy. And you don't get those from just a single sheet of paper like a resume. And that's why our product, our tool, and obviously this conversation on video is so important.
Right. You talked a lot about the value that it adds to the employers. Talk about it from the job seeker side. What is the benefits from the job seeker side? What are they getting?
So a resume, well, let's remove video for a second. What do we have in the hiring process to present ourselves? We have a LinkedIn, we have a resume, we have a cover letter. Basically, those three things, the resume is the currency. And the only thing that has to do with the resume is what you've accomplished and what you've written out. Now, to be able to articulate your life story into a single sheet of paper is both difficult, but also really, really important to be able to consolidate your message, your story, your value into a single sheet of paper. However, there's absolutely nothing there about who you are. Let's remove the conversations around, even so many people lie on resumes, people fabricate their titles, all that different stuff. But let's assume all resumes are true. There's still nothing about you as a person. And that's why video is such an important conversation, because you actually get to know somebody. That's why we always encourage organizations to say, if you really, really care to hire for people, for culture, for fit, you're not getting those things from a resume or a cover letter. You want to know more about who that person is before you actually hire them. And that's what video can do.
Okay. Now, you've touched a little bit on Wedge being an asynchronous platform. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between kind of the two views, the synchronous and asynchronous video interview?
For sure. And asynchronous is like the most obnoxious, I can't spell it still. But at the end of the day, the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, synchronous is Zoom, Google Hangouts. It's one-on-one communication happening at the same time. Not necessarily one-on-one, but it's communication happening at the same time in real time. So a Zoom call right now, it's us together communicating back and forth. A phone call, same exact thing. It's us on the phone talking to each other. Whereas a text is I send, you review, you respond. That's asynchronous communication. Listening to a podcast is asynchronous communication. It's one-way response or interpretation of information and then response back. And so we specifically play in the asynchronous video interview space because companies can ask a series of questions, candidates respond to them on their own time, comfort of their own home, on their own device, and then the results of those questions, or viewing the video itself, the company can review those on their own time, comfort of their own home, that whole side of things. So it's specifically asynchronous, different than synchronous. I can go into the reasons why there's different values if you want, but that's probably a good definition to start.
Yeah, but please do. I think it would be insightful because job seekers are going to be exposed to both. So your view of the benefits of both would be great.
One of the biggest differences, so the thing with synchronous is it requires two people communicating at the same time. So schedules have to match up. So Ryan, you and I decided to do this podcast at a certain time. We both agreed, we set that up and we made it happen, right?
Yep.
The problem with that is that you think at scale of hiring people, scheduling phone screens, scheduling Zoom meetings, scheduling is just complicated. And that's even small organizations. Imagine magnitudes of larger. Sure, there's certain tools to line up, but at the end of the day, you're still using people's times to communicate at the same time together. The reason why asynchronous video is such a value add is that you remove scheduling and you remove the whole need for people communicating at the same time together. Now, we're not coming out and saying asynchronous can remove all sides of hiring. No. But what we can remove is that entry-level phone screen that's a lot of wasted time, both for the recruiter and the candidate. And a lot of those turn out to be as preliminary. Basically, can you show up and can you chat? Can you have a conversation for 10 minutes? Regardless of what questions are being asked. Our product can completely remove that while also simultaneously allowing other people to watch the results of the video. The moment you ask 5 or 6 people to be on a phone screen, that gets really expensive. It's not doable. But with an asynchronous video, you can actually have that video watch, rewatch, or share it among team members. That adds a lot of value and benefit to it.
One of the concerns I would have as a job seeker is thinking about the opportunity for follow-ups, such as right now, I'm asking a follow-up question based off of what you just said. With asynchronous, it seems like you lose a lot of that ability. Can you talk a little bit about, is Wedge doing anything to help support that, or other platforms? How do you address the ability to get those in-depth insight with follow-up questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just as a clarifying piece, when you say follow-up, are you meaning that, like, let's say a candidate answered a question and then realizing 10 minutes later they wish they would have said something else or wish they would have said more? Is that what you mean by follow-up?
Or that as an interviewer, I want to go deeper into this topic. Like they gave a surface level answer that they thought was adequate, but I want to go more. Or maybe they went slightly off track and I want to nudge them back in the right way. It's pretty common in a one-on-one interview that there's a dialogue, that you have the ability to pivot the conversation as the conversation flows. And with asynchronous, that creates challenges.
Yeah, it's a great question. On the company side, that's what the secondary phone screen is, or the secondary Zoom call, or the more in-depth communication. We are specifically replacing sort of that entry-level pre-screen. So for us, we're not intending for these videos to go major in-depth. They certainly can. We certainly have companies doing longer form videos, but they allow candidates to have long periods of time to communicate how long they need. So for example, you could set the questions to be 1-minute response or 5-minute response, thus that the candidate gets to respond, answer as long as they can. Now, what you're alluding to is you answered it this way, I have a follow-up question. That's when typically a phone screener, that's when, you care enough about that candidate to dedicate time to them synchronously. And that's where we would encourage you. Great. We're not trying to remove all phone screens or all Zoom calls. That would be a wonderful time to have, a follow-up set up as well too. We do have some companies doing follow-up Wedge interviews as well. It's not just a one-off, but it could be multiple series as well. That's certainly able for companies to do as well.
So for a job seeker, they should be aware that likely if they get an invite to do a Wedge interview, this is a preliminary stage.
Yep.
Their focus should be trying to get to the next step and not feeling like this is their only chance to get through the whole process.
Exactly. And that's the very reason we built retakes into the platform. So specifically speaking to the job seeker, video is intimidating. We're not gonna be the first to come out to say that. Like, video is, obviously Zoom has changed a lot of things, but our goal as a vendor in this space, and ultimately as we become a thought leader and industry dominating, our job is to make sure candidates have a wonderful experience. And if candidates don't have a good experience, we've created a complete crap product. Like, our goal is to make sure that a candidate goes through, feels like their story is told, feels like their voice is heard, and feel like they actually had a chance to present themselves in the hiring process. And so that's why we encourage companies to say, hey, when you are asking candidates to do this, majority of jobs, you should have them go through retakes. You should allow retakes, because most jobs don't require that much 30-second pitch to how well you can do. My job does. I'm on this podcast. I have to pitch in front of investors. I only get one shot to wow people, but most jobs are not like mine. And I'm not saying good or bad. They're just not. Most jobs, you're allowed to have like secondary conversations. You're allowed to have follow-ups. And that's why we encourage companies to turn on retakes for candidates, because it just makes an altogether different experience and a better experience for them.
And how does the retake process work? Like, do they just feel like they didn't do a good job, or do they have the ability to view their initial recording and make the decision from there?
They have the ability to rewatch the video. So you'll record, and let's say first question is, tell me about yourself. Hi, I'm Matt. I have a golden retriever, blah, blah, blah. And then the video's done. And then literally in the platform, I can rewatch and say I liked it or I didn't like it, go back and do it again, or move forward to the next question.
And then after a job seeker submits, do they have the ability to continue to view theirs, or is once they submit, it's out, they lose that ability?
Well, yeah, once they submit, that goes to the company. But obviously throughout the whole stage, they can watch the whole video and make sure that they like what they've submitted, assuming retakes are on.
One of the biggest problems in the industry right now is the black hole, especially with resumes. When you're submitting your application, you submit it, maybe you get that confirmation that it was received, and that's it, right? Especially with the high applicant volume that's occurred over the past year and a half. Is there, beyond the value of the job seeker really being able to show their whole self, what other contributions is Wedge making to the job seeker experience?
So some of that's leading from the company sides and the I guess, credibility we can have in encouraging companies. So a lot of times, the cool part about the sales process when selling HR tech is most of the time you're not just talking about, here's the product, purchase it, here's the cost, see ya. It's a lot of times, here's the problems we're having. Here's the headaches that we're dealing with. Here's in specific talking companies, but I'm going to come why this is important is that we get to come alongside as an advocate, a consultant, whatever you want, and to say, hey, here's maybe some gaps, or here you presented these challenges that you're having. Here's what we would recommend. So one thing, for example, that we recommend is like high touch point emails or high frequency of communication back and forth with the candidates. One of the most disheartening things that I've seen, had people talk to, I've even gone through just to experience myself, is when you go through a lot of effort of filling out an application and zero communication. I think people would be okay if somebody was like, hey, sorry, that you're just not the right fit for the job. Like, I think people would be okay with that, but at least give them something. And so that's where, as a vendor and as somebody who, not specifically just me, but our whole team, when people come back, when companies say, hey, we're having these challenges, we're having these headaches, that's one piece that we have, is have open dialogue with candidates and obviously fit into compliance and making sure it's value add, but like making sure you're just communicating back and forth with candidates, especially when you think, like, put yourself in the candidate's shoes. If you've gone through all this different effort, you've gone through all this different things, and nobody's communicated back to you, I mean, that's just terrible. Like, that's just, and so that's more company focused, but I guess, well, I'll pause there. Anything else on that? I mean,
no, but I do want to affirm that as a 20-year recruiter, I'll tell you the number one response to, I'm sorry, you're not selected for the next step, is thank you, because they're so used to not getting anything. I think a lot of recruiters, especially early career recruiters, pause because they're afraid of delivering a rejection message and what will the response be. And 90% of the time, it's thank you for letting me know.
Exactly. Like, humanity is a lot tougher than we think. And also, like, we think we're the bad guys. But if you call somebody and say, hey, look, I'm really sorry, this is just not the right fit, but I'll keep in mind, I'll keep you, I'll keep your resume if you'd like. People people get refreshed by that. Like, and so I know it's delivering hard news. I mean, it's not, but I think we all in all could do a better job as HR tech vendors. And in magnitudes as the recruiting industry, we could do a better job of communicating back to candidates, because at the end of the day, if you don't communicate back, that's building a reputation as a company, and that's going to hurt you. And some companies, yes, don't struggle to deal with applicant flow, sure, but at the end of the day, like, you want to have a good reputation, say, hey, even if we didn't hire you, we still took care of you, we still were respectful, we still honored your time. I just think that's a good message as an organization.
A lot of applicants, when they're looking for a new job, they're not focused. A lot of people, especially in the high unemployment market, are almost desperate, right? So they're applying to multiple jobs at the same time. And this means that when they do get responses, they kind of weigh the processes they have to go through for a job. this creates another process. So what are you seeing? What kind of completion rate are you seeing on Wedge interviews across the board? And is it company influenced, or is it kind of universal across the board?
Yeah, we aim for about 50%. So assessment average is about 30%. So our goal is to confidently come into companies and say, hey, we believe that between 40 and 50%, we can deliver on that excellence. Now, it's funny because sometimes companies are like, that's too many, that's too much. And which is really interesting because there are some companies that say we want to put assessments or something in front of candidates, knowing that naturally will whittle down to the one who actually wants the job versus not. That's one obviously interesting take as well too. But at the end of the day, we want candidates, if invites are sent, we want them to go through the process of completing it. So some tactical things, and this is on us to do, is like, number one, reminder systems. Sometimes I get emails and I just forget. I'm sure you've probably sent me an email that I totally forgot to respond. And I'm bad at we all have full inboxes, we all have full text messages, all these things happen. Reminder systems are appropriate, right? Whether it's an email reminder, text reminder, whatever you want. That's just low-hanging fruit that you can do that naturally skyrockets completion rate. Follow-ups are good. And also the crafted message of what you're asking a candidate to do is huge. So, hi, do this one-way video interview. We'll see you next week. That's terrible. I'm not going to do that. But hey, we love your resume. We want to know more about you. And we'd love to actually have you go through this process to share a little bit more about who you are and share a little bit more about your story. Would you be willing to complete this? We hope that it takes you less than 10 minutes. That's a message that people can, oh, okay, sure, I'll go do that. So there's certainly the messaging, the crafting, the reminder systems, I think are huge.
A lot of employers, especially in high growth companies, struggle with knowing what to ask. And I know you're really addressing, as you said, that kind of the early stage process where typically it's pre-screening recruiters who are used to asking those types of questions. But still, does Wedge provide guidance to employers on what to ask and how to evaluate the responses?
Now we really need to get some scotch in front of us because this is where I could rant for a long time. But so we from the beginning have about 150 pre-populated questions that companies can choose from. So we wanted to at least provide somewhat of an already in the box, ready to rock and roll, or a template, if you will, of saying, hey, emotional intelligence questions around behavioral-based interviewing, emotional intelligence, coachability, teamwork, motivations, those categories of questions to say they're open-ended, let the candidate take and roll with it. We provide those and we say, hey, if you don't know what to ask or you don't necessarily have custom questions you want to create, you can use any of ours. With that being said, we also allow for custom-based questions. Now, where the rant begins, and I'll try to keep this short, but the first thing I think at the end of the day you have to ask is, what are you trying to get out of this phone screen? So let's say Wedge is entirely replacing the preliminary phone screen, that 15-minute phone screen. You ask majority of recruiters, if they're being honest, it's, does the person show up? Can they chat with me for 15 minutes? And can they reasonably be able to respond to a few questions I ask? I don't really care that much about the context of the question or their answers, but I more care, can they formulate a thought that's valuable and something worth chatting with? So think about the same thing in this whole we have a company and I've had some healthy debates about whether this is a good or bad thing, but one of our companies asked the question, tell me a joke. And they allow candidates to tell a joke for 2 minutes. And it's a way because their role is customer facing. And a lot of times there's humor in sales. A lot of times being able, and so all they want to do is figure out, can this person reasonably come up with something somewhat entertaining, get a little bit excited. And plus it just makes it a fun process. Interviewing doesn't have to be this relentless, horrible, how well do you present the facts and the facts? Let's get to humanity and let's get to who people are, because at the end of the day, that's who you're hiring. And so whether tell me a joke is appropriate or not, that's a whole healthy debate. But at the end of the day, that preliminary phone screen is so centered around who is this person and can I reasonably have a communication and conversation with them? That's exactly what we should set up the entry-level pre-screening should be as well.
Does Wedge play more effectively within certain roles? That kind of made me think about some things, like some roles that personality is critical, and others, not so much. Do you find that Wedge is more impactful in roles that require kind of more of that strong communication skills, maybe more extroverted, those kinds of roles?
So we specifically play in, obviously customer facing roles work phenomenal. Anytime that you have to communicate with a customer, a partner, a client, anything like that, certainly that works well. So sales, account management, retail. But we've also gained a lot of steam with manufacturing, trucking for kind of the conversation around in the old age, you would have to have a trucker, for example, put on a suit and tie and go in person for the interview. Why? Like what? How is that job relevant whatsoever? In fact, that's probably discouraging to somebody who could be a really, really good truck driver. Like, why is it? And so that's why we've actually gained some steam, is because yes, they need to be able to have phone calls, they need to be able to have conversation, and that's where our product can come in well too. So we really don't touch a ton of executive level, at least up until this point, because that's such high touch point, and because so much of it is actually, I'm trying to laser focus and sniper rifle recruit you to this organization where it's not as many application based. So that's we certainly have a few select cases that's worked well, but it's a little edge case to say. But majority of what we do is, relatively industry agnostic, high turnover roles, customer facing roles, any form like communication or dialogue roles. Obviously, those are valuable and value added.
I've heard you address this on a few of your other podcasts, but I think we want to get really deep here because it's such an important topic today: diversity. You're now giving the opportunity for the job seeker to put their whole self out there, which in many ways can be a bit intimidating because they feel like, and probably truthfully so, not gotten jobs because of the fact that it is not within their control. There have been recent studies that have shown that improvements in diversity in the selection process have been stagnant for 25 years. We made some progress for a while, but lately, nothing. So if people have concern about their being evaluated because of their race, their gender, other factors that come into play, what are your thoughts around the diversity challenges, and how does Wedge support that?
Number one, both personally and the organization Wedge, it's a topic that's very important to all of us, and how you can come about and actually be an asset, a part of this conversation, rather than a hindrance or a deterrent. So since day one, previous background was landscaping and lawn care. The very first time I pitched the idea of Wedge, little did I know I was going to be having a lot of conversation around bias, diversity, inclusion, all these different things, which are so important topics. So I've actually learned to love this conversation, because so video typically gets scrutinized because it's an identifying factor of a lot of different race, gender, age, weight, all these different things that have come up, right? You don't see that on a resume, so you do see it in video. Now all of a sudden it's a concern. Right. Here's where I would challenge a few different levels of that. And here's where I think this whole conversation can be changed to a benefit. So number one, the majority of bias cases happen between one-on-one interpretation of information, regardless of what it is. I have bias. If I'm reviewing a piece of information, I'm going to have biases towards whatever I'm reviewing. So if that's a resume, that's a LinkedIn profile picture, that's a phone screen, that's a Zoom interview, that's an in-person interview. Let's just take interviewing, that range. The moment you introduce 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, 6 people to that conversation, you can reduce bias and discrimination statistics. You can reduce some of the negative outcomes that happen. Now, the reason why that's not always viable, if you will, is that not every single time a phone screen happens are you going to have 5 or 6 or 7 different recruiters on that call. Why? Because it's expensive. And I'm not saying that's a good excuse, but that's why you usually only have one person. The other problem is when you're phone screening somebody, you're taking your notes and you're passing along to a company, or you're passing along to your superior, HR manager, whatever it is. It's only as good as one person's interpretation. With asynchronous video, it is now a recording that you can go watch, rewatch again, and determine that is the reason why I chose to hire or not to hire the candidate. And here's the information we went off of. It's right here. It's right in front of us. Also, what we've, as a company, and we've taken great strides to encourage all companies to do, is the fact that you can take a video and you can share it. You can share with internal team members. Again, to the point of the moment I introduce this piece of information to somebody else, we can naturally reduce my sole bias or my sole discriminating pieces that may or may not be in existence. That's where all of a sudden, and the coolest thing is it's a system of record. You can go back internally and you can say, man, I was really having a bad day. I was thinking about something else when I was taking notes on this candidate, so I probably didn't like him. That's bias. That's exactly bias. But now all of a sudden with an asynchronous video, I could watch and say, man, I'm just not in the right headspace to watch this. Okay, Ryan, will you watch this as well too? Now let's both talk about it 20 minutes later after we both call, whatever it is. That's where now all of a sudden we can help actually not only be an asset, a part of like the compliance side for companies, but also in reducing some of the negative outcomes of bias and discrimination.
isn't the rejection likely to happen with that first person, and then they're not going to share it again, and they're not going to revisit? Or do you encourage employers to have 2 or 3 reviews? And if so, that's still cost prohibitive because you're still asking multiple people. I know it's definitely more efficient being asynchronous, but still, I would think the typical use case is it's still that frontline recruiter making that one-on-one decision on that person. If they do have inherent bias, it's still going to come to play in there, and that's being rejected at that point. It's really the rejection where the bias comes in more than the progression.
Yeah, and so some of the bias that I think we're probably talking about here, the problem is that's already been alluded to by the moment that person passed the resume. Let's assume that the resume checked out. The next step that recruiter made was looking at their LinkedIn. So video entering the conversation has nothing to do with this. That's already been identified, and so this is just a secondary stage to that. Now, with that being said, though, the moment you can share a video in 30 seconds, a minute long, whatever it may be, with team members that were probably likely to be involved in the next Zoom call, where all of that may have come out as well, too. And so you're removing that sort of barrier, and that's the point of asynchronous communication. You can share this, they can watch it on their own time, that by the time somebody comes in person, a lot of whatever you're going to choose, let's say just value add, is this candidate good or not, you're determining that quickly before that person comes in, or all the scheduling headaches that are involved as well too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So let's move on to advice for the job seeker. I'm a job seeker. I get a Wedge invite. What advice do you have to give the best impression? I know that you're able to use any device to record it, but in your experience, do you feel there's value in having the better webcam, the better mic, better lighting is this kind of improve your chances? What advice do you have for a job seeker to make sure they put themselves in the best light and give themselves the best opportunity to progress?
Yeah, so I never think it hurts to be over prepared versus under prepared, right? So and no matter what the circumstances, I think having decent lighting, being well spoken, being able to look at the camera, just taking a deep breath, and that's something that we encourage in the in the actual recording of a Wedge, is that there's a stop and think time. It's okay, breathe, take a second, gather your thoughts, go ahead and present. And truly, and this is so cliche, and I get that probably somebody wants to smack me in the face, but be yourself. It's the perfect time to be exactly who you are. Because at the end of the day, I know people want to get a job, and I know that's how important that is. But you want a job that you feel like you articulated who you were to get that job. You're going to be happier. They're going to be happier. Or maybe you didn't get the job, but at least you were authentic. And so that's what we encourage candidates, is to say, when you're actually going through this, whether that's a video interview, whether that's a phone screen, whether that's a LinkedIn profile, but truly just be who you are, present that. And I just think that trumps every single time. But I mean, I guess tactically, we've had phenomenal experience with candidates recording on both their phone and desktop. Certainly, actually higher percentage on their phone than a desktop, and the quality works out just as well. iPhones obviously are phenomenal. Androids are great. The quality of video both on mobile has now equal par to desktop. So there no real preference there. There's not any negatives on either side of those. But yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest advice and all that, and hopefully it's helpful and not just kind of esoteric, but be yourself on it. Just truly, don't be afraid to be authentically exactly who you are. And that way, when you get hired, it's for somebody who wants to hire you, not just kind of who you pretended to be.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure on job seekers when they're out applying. The need to get a job sometimes makes them feel like they can't be themselves if they are concerned that maybe there's something in their background that doesn't help them progress. So we're
all humans, and if companies are that relentless about it, so it's totally good.
And employers are doing the same thing too, right? It's not like they show you the dark side of whatever's going on within there. Everybody's best face forward. So what's next for Wedge? You've come a long way since 2015. A lot of growth recently. What's on the horizon?
Well, we wrapped up a funding round, which was good to get done. I took a nap, for 20 minutes and then back at it. So that was exciting. But yeah, we wrapped up the funding round. We've got a great group of investors, some in this industry, which is really awesome and exciting. We just expanded our sales team. We're expanding our development team. We're really going after kind of deep dive into the franchise model. We're deep diving into our applicant tracking system partners. We're really, really sort of taking a large leaps and bounds to really, really, really have an impact in the small to mid market. But that being said, our product scales up well with enterprise. But there's such a need, and there's such untapped potential in the small to mid markets. And there's such a need for solutions like ours and tech like ours, and not just us, but the partners we partner with on the applicant tracking system side, background check side, all that. So we're really going after saying, hey, how can we be, such a value add to the small to mid-market businesses?
Yeah. And this next year is probably going to be as interesting as last year. I think we're about to find
wild
out
ride.
what happens when employers start saying, okay, now come back to the office, and see how many resignations start happening there. And the people who have been out of work and are now getting back. It's going to be a fun run for those of us in the TA field for the next.
It's going to be like the greatest case study that's ever happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thanks again for your time. That's all I have. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you really wish you had the opportunity to share with job seekers?
I think you crushed it. I just appreciate you having me as a guest, and hopefully there was some small pearl of wisdom, if nothing else, all the things you shouldn't do. So seriously, thank you a ton for having me, and just excited to join you on this journey as well too.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Your insight's been great. I think job seekers can now feel more prepared and confident going into their Wedge interview or other interview platform. And I wish you the best of luck with Wedge.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks.